The world was already at war, but America waited on the sidelines, watching, waiting, reluctant to get involved. While Hitler's armies rushed across Europe and Japan stretched its influence across the Pacific, the United States held on to neutrality. But would a nation founded on freedom turn a blind eye to a world engulfed by tyranny? The portents of war were all around. American factories secretly produced for the Allies, U.S. ships were attacked on open seas, and diplomatic pressures mounted. Then came the day that transformed everything. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor by surprise, dispelling any dreams of remaining neutral. In an instant, America's fate was rewritten. The country that had fought its way out of the Great Depression was on the verge of becoming something much more. This wouldn't be merely a war, it would be a challenge to America's power, work ethic, and leadership. Would America step up to the challenge or crumble under the burden of global war? December 7, 1941, began like any other morning in Pearl Harbor. Then, in an instant, the sky darkened, not with cloud cover, but with the masses of Japanese planes heading towards the U.S. Pacific Fleet. In a matter of minutes, panic had erupted. The explosions shattered the quiet, the battleships were burning, and over 2,400 Americans had died. It was not only an attack on American land, it was an open defiance of the country's authority and security. For decades, the U.S. had adopted a policy of aloofness, hesitant to enter the world war that had consumed Europe and Asia. But one day, all of that changed. The following day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt spoke to Congress, giving his now infamous speech, referring to December 7th as a date which will live in infamy. America reacted quickly. America went to war against Japan and officially engaged in World War II. Germany and Italy, Japan's Axis partners, declared war on the U.S. several days later, pulling the country into a full-scale global war. The sleeping giant had been roused, and its involvement in the war would change the balance of power, but it wouldn't be won without a struggle. America had to be remade from an economy in recovery to a war machine. War production soared. Factories which produced automobiles previously now produced tanks, aircraft, and munitions. The government called up millions of workers, women among them, who moved into jobs once done by men. Rosie the Riveter symbolized American grit as citizens from coast to coast lent their hands to the war effort. In a matter of months, the U.S. military grew at a pace without precedent. Its Navy, which had been nearly destroyed at Pearl Harbor, was rebuilt and brought up to date. Aircraft carriers, which had been regarded as secondary to battleships, were now the major force in naval warfare. While that, American troops, referred to as the GIs, were being sent off to battlefields in Europe and the Pacific, ready to engage for their nation's survival and future supremacy. Pearl Harbor was not merely an attack. It was the trigger that turned the United States from a secluded nation into a global superpower in the making. With its factories humming, its army expanding, and its people united behind a common purpose, America was no longer merely waging a war. It was setting out to remake the world. But the true test of its strength was yet to come, as the war raged on and the stakes grew even higher. When the United States entered World War II, it didn't merely put soldiers on the battlefield, it put its entire economy into action. Factories that had previously churned out automobiles, appliances, and consumer items were converted to power the war effort. Auto manufacturers such as Ford ceased to produce civilian automobiles and instead constructed tanks, jeeps, and bombers. Shipyards worked day and night to build warships at an unprecedented rate. The U.S. wasn't only gearing up for war, it was becoming the world's best military supplier. It wasn't by chance that this happened. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had already laid the groundwork with his storied appeal to make America the arsenal of democracy. His government cooperated extensively with industries, giving them contracts and financing to guarantee quick production. The outcomes were staggering. By the close of the war, the U.S. had manufactured almost 300,000 planes, 100,000 tanks, and millions of rifles, artillery rounds, and other necessities. Outproducing the enemy became a determining factor in bringing about an end to the war. It wasn't merely machines, though. It was about human beings. With millions of men called up into the armed forces, the American labor force had to adapt. Women filled the gap in record numbers, working in factories, shipyards, and other sectors. Rosie the Riveter was a national symbol, representing the resilience and determination of women who maintained the economy. Meanwhile, African Americans and other minorities discovered new opportunities, though they were subject to discrimination. They came to cities seeking work, creating demographic changes that would influence the country for generations to come. The war economy not only produced weapons, it spurred innovation. Federal money flowed into research, resulting in breakthroughs in radar, man-made materials, and even early computer science. The military-industrial complex was born, connecting companies, scientists, and the government in ways that would persist long after the war was over. By the end of World War II, the United States had not only won the conflict, but had solidified itself as an industrial power. Its factories had produced more than any other country, its labor force had changed, and its technological prowess had revolutionized warfare. By 1944, the war had turned, but victory was not assured. Nazi Germany needed a crushing blow to shake its hold on Europe. That day arrived on D-Day, June 6, 1944, the greatest amphibious assault in history. American, British, and Canadian troops stormed the Normandy beaches under withering German fire. The price was savage. Thousands of troops were killed, but their blood broke Hitler's Atlantic Wall. In a matter of weeks, Allied troops advanced further into France, and by August, Paris was free. D-Day was not only a battle, it was the start of the end for Nazi Germany. But as Europe's destiny was being decided, the Pacific was still a bloody battlefield. The U.S. pursued an island-hopping strategy, seizing strategic islands while bypassing heavily defended Japanese strongpoints. This brought them closer to Japan without wasting resources on every enemy fortress. Every battle was tough. At Iwo Jima, close to 7,000 Americans lost their lives to capture the small island. At Okinawa, more than 12,000 U.S. soldiers were killed in what turned out to be one of the most bloody battles in the war. Japanese troops, determined not to surrender, fought to the bitter end, utilizing kamikaze tactics to create annihilating casualties. The ferocity of the war required complete dedication. Back home, Americans rationed food, labored in factories around the clock, and purchased war bonds to finance the war effort. In combat, troops faced unimaginable suffering, marching on despite hopeless odds. Each sacrifice made America stronger, making it a country unlike any other, a military and economic giant that would dominate the post-war landscape. But as victory was at hand, another even more difficult choice awaited. How would America bring the war to a lasting end? When Japan continued to refuse to surrender in the face of catastrophic losses, the United States had a daunting choice. An invasion of the Japanese mainland on a full-scale level would mean hundreds of thousands of American lives lost. Instead, a top-secret weapon, created under the Manhattan Project, was soon to alter history forever. In August 1945, the world saw the most deadly force ever unleashed, the atomic bomb. With the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the war ended quickly and horribly. But as the mushroom clouds dissipated, a new world order was born, one in which the United States was not only victorious, but also the world's undisputed superpower. America had spent years developing a secret project that would forever change warfare. The Manhattan Project, a clandestine research project, assembled the finest scientific brains in the world to create nuclear arms. Albert Einstein's letter to President Roosevelt had alarmed the nation of Nazi Germany's ambitions for atomic power, triggering an arms race. By July 1945, America had successfully tested the first atomic bomb in the New Mexico desert. But the ultimate test lay on the battlefield. On August 6, 1945, a lone American B-29 aircraft, Enola Gay, flew over Hiroshima, dropping a bomb never before seen. In a matter of seconds, the city was scorched by an intense flash of light, which was followed by a firestorm that reduced everything in its path to a smoldering ruin. More than 80,000 people were killed immediately, and tens of thousands more died from radiation poisoning in the weeks that followed. Not even Japan's destruction could change its mind. 3 days after Hiroshima, on August 9th, the United States dropped a second atomic bomb, this time on Nagasaki. Another 70,000 were killed in an instant. This time, the message was clear: surrender or be annihilated. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito spoke to the nation, declaring Japan's unconditional surrender. World War II was officially at an end. Although the bombings brought the deadliest war in human history to an end, they also marked the beginning of a new world. The United States had shown unparalleled military might, and the world had entered the atomic era. America became a world superpower in the wake of it, its economy thriving, its armed forces unparalleled, and its influence spanning continents. But triumph came at a terrible cost. The nuclear arms race had commenced, and with it, the Cold War would soon spread its long shadow across the globe. The question now was not so much if America had won the war, but what type of world it had established in doing so. The world was forever altered. America had emerged triumphant, its military unparalleled, its reach spanning the globe. Power, however, never remains uncontested for very long. When cities were rebuilt and countries restored, a new competition arose, albeit not one waged by soldiers on a battlefield, but with ideologies, computers, and threats of nuclear attack. The former ally, now the Soviet Union, became America's greatest rival, and the world was thus split between two superpowers. This was no classical war with visible battlefronts, but a war of spies, propaganda, and battles of proxy. From the space race to the accumulation of nuclear weapons, every step was a planned ploy in a game in which survival itself was the stake. But for all the tensions and near misses, one thing hung over them all: whether either could win a war never openly fought, or was it the precursor to an even bigger realignment in world power?